the touch of your lips, dear, but much more for the touch of your whips, dear. You can raise welts like nobody else as we dance to the masochism tango.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Hourgasm. This is the podcast where we talk about decolonizing sexuality and gender. I am Lindsay G. I use she, her, or they, them pronouns.
And I am Melanie Peppers. I use she, her pronouns.
And I am Amanda Barr, and I also use she, her pronouns.
Awesome. We are really, really excited to talk to everybody today on the topic of sex and disability. But before we dive into that, Lenny, take it away.
In this podcast, we use the heteronormative terms of gender binary of men and women under the understanding that there are agender, androgynous, bigender, pangender, and gender fluid norms that exist outside of cisnormativity. While we tend to use male and female as shorthand, this is not meant to undermine the very serious role of colonization in violence against two-spirit and non-conforming individuals. Even more so, this is not meant to obscure the reality that two-spirit and non-conforming people are the most likely to experience sexual violence, as we have mentioned in earlier episodes. We do not believe in the gender binary without fluidity, which is a Euro-Western construct that forced a strict gender division on our societies, which itself is a form of violence.
Very fucking true. Well, thank you, Lenny. So everyone, I am excited to say that on our podcast today, we have the amazing Amanda Barr, and Amanda is here to talk with us about sex and disability, but I keep putting this off. I keep saying, let's just wait a second till we start talking about it. But Amanda, can you tell us and our listeners a little bit about where you're coming from and, what your deal is?
Yeah, so me right now, I am doing an MFA in studio arts and an MA in art history.
Whoa.
But previously, I had an MA in Spanish and modern languages, and I've been in education for around 14 years now.
Wow.
Which, is pretty much because of growing up as a kid with disabilities and a student with disabilities who went through a lot of abuse and a failure of the education system to protect me and to not only protect me, but to serve me. And I think that's really how I ended up going into a field like language, because I wanted to communicate. I loved the idea of learning other languages along with the history and culture that are attached, just in a way to be able to reach out and communicate with more people than just those who share my language and culture. And in that, becoming an educator was a way to teach others to do that. And I learned really quickly in my undergrad that I was pretty good in the classroom setting, mostly because I do have this kind of in with students, in that I understand what it's like to come from the struggle of learning access and not really being expected to do much, so not being given any attention. And it in my experience as an educator, it's given me a different insight into the student experience. So it allows me to kind of transform my classroom, at least, into one that includes people despite what obstacles they are facing. So after first grad school, I kind of got a little more into art as a coping mechanism for some stuff I was going through. And it really snowballed and ended up being something that I wanted to get more into and teach. So I came back for an MFA, and I really like art history. So I added that degree because it was available.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely love all of that. Actually, that's a little bit about how Amanda and I met. My PhD is in kind of art and media as resilience. And so our paths were bound to cross in this little town, no matter what.
Yeah.
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 So, like just a personal history, I was diagnosed when I was 5 with what was then called petit mal epilepsy, which is now termed absence seizures. So not the grand mal that
right.
everyone's kind of familiar with when you say seizure.
Yeah.
Mine were more just like flicking the light switch off and then back on again.
Okay.
Is my brain would just shut down for a second and then I'd be back. But by the time I'd be back, I will have lost muscle control and often bladder control. And then sometimes it's so quick that it's just like I paused to think about what I was saying for a little too long. And then caught back up with the conversation. So my parents thought I was just a real space cadet of a kid.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't realize that what I was actually doing was having seizures. So they just thought I was really ditzy for a long time.
Oh, wow.
And I had chronic migraines to go with that, because when your brain is really stressed with the seizures, you will have migraines and headaches. And so from such a young age, I didn't realize my head wasn't supposed to hurt all the time. Like I thought that's just how you felt.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I would say, like, I think my head hurts, but I didn't know what the scale was for that.
Yeah.
I had no comprehension of it. And so I was having what most people would consider a debilitating migraine, like constantly, like that was my level, which was cool to find out and actually start getting treated, because I was like, wow, it doesn't hurt to have the lights on.
Yeah. Wow.
So then a few years ago, I also found out that I have some kind of connective tissue disorder similar to Ehlers-Danlos. But it is unspecified for now, which is cool.
Oh, yeah, fun. I'm sure.
And as well, I from decades of neglect and abuse, both in my childhood and as an adult, I have been diagnosed with chronic PTSD.
Yeah.
So I'm just a whole ball of fun.
Well, I'm having fun so far. I don't know. With you, I mean.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, but I mean, it's super freaking awesome to me that you've sort of made it your mission to provide for other people what you didn't have provided for you as a student.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's how I've always phrased it. Like, I just want other students to have the kind of support and the resources that I never got.
Yeah.
Because it's been so hard for me. Like, I was told I wasn't going to graduate high school. I missed so many days of school, and they didn't think my brain had the capacity to really get beyond that.
Wow.
And I've had to sort of fight for everything, to accomplish anything in life. It's like, well, I don't know if you could do that. I don't know if that's a good idea. You hear that a lot. Like, are you sure you're capable of that? So, just to show people that it's a possibility, but also to like help make those barriers lower and provide a little more access.
Yeah. And there's, I think, a huge value for young people, like at any at any stage of the education process, particularly to be taught by an educator who is open about those obstacles that they've faced. And because it just, I feel like this is probably something that we're going to be talking about a lot today, so I'm just going to like go for it and say something that I feel a little weird saying, but like it's not often that we see someone in a position of authority that we can understand to have disabilities. And
Yeah.
I recognize like I still really, really grapple with this in my own life. Like I grew up with rheumatoid arthritis from the time that I was literally an infant. And I have sort of a similar situation to what you mentioned, which was like growing up in constant physical pain, but I had like no concept of it. That was just life. And like, I've been medicated for pretty much my entire life. Like these are just normal things to me. And it's interesting, like as I get older, that I start to look around and realize my own limitations physically. Because as I get older, they get worse physically. But I realize that like I don't think I ever thought of myself as someone who's affected by disability, and that a lot of that might be because I never saw anyone with disabilities that looked anything like mine. So I didn't put myself in that group. But it's kind of like I'm looking back over my life and it's like, well, yeah, I definitely am a disabled person.
That's a whole conversation. My mother to this day is like, don't call yourself disabled. You're not disabled. And I'm like, yeah, yes, I am actually. And that messaging that disabled was bad,
Mm-hmm.
that I got so much as a child, that it was imperfection, that it made you inferior, that it made you, actually my mom called me defective at times. Like, God got this one wrong. This one was, factory defect.
Oh my God. I literally once had a doctor do x-rays, and when he brought them back in, like, to look at them with us, he was like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to send you back to God with a note that says, please remake. And I was like 16, and I thought it was a funny joke. So I laughed. And then it was like later, I'm like in the car on my way home, and I'm like, holy shit, that was fucked up.
Yeah.
But similar, and I had then like my mom thought it was funny too. So then she repeated it to everybody, and it's.
Yeah. And that kind of messaging is really, really intensely embedded in in a lot of cultures, actually. Like I've heard, it's God didn't break the mold with you. It's God should have replaced the mold before he made you, because it was broken.
Fuck.
And that extreme amount of messaging that we are defective, that we are, not right, that we came out wrong. That, I loved my mom also still says like, well, I sinned somehow and you were my penance.
Oh my.
And I'm like,
Oh.
the messaging to me in that is so horrific.
Yeah, like you have been inflicted on a parent.
Yeah. And that,
Jesus.
that's a whole thing, especially with autism and vaccines, that I could talk about for years, because like when you are like, I'd rather my kid die of measles than get a vaccine and possibly have autism, the messaging that people with autism receive from that is supremely fucked.
Yeah.
And there's this concept that we call invisible disability, where like with RA and with most of the things that I deal with, people can't see you in a wheelchair. They don't see you using a cane or sign language, and they don't see braces, or sometimes I do have to wear a brace, but they don't see the signs of disability. And so they think, oh, well, you're not disabled.
Yeah.
you don't have a
Yeah.
disability. You can't use that label because there are people out there with it worse than you who have to use a walker, a chair. But disability just really means that you have something that affects your ability to live your life to the full extent. Like something that, I mean, it's like the way that I explain obsessive compulsive disorder to people is that it's not a disorder. Like you can't say, oh, I'm so OCD. It's not a disorder unless it actually disrupts your life, unless it's a complication that gets in the way of you living your life.
Yeah.
And, you know, some disabilities can be managed to the point where they don't interrupt your life anymore, but you still have a disability because if you stopped taking care of yourself, they would remanifest. Like if I take my seizure meds on a regular basis, I don't have seizures anymore. That doesn't mean I don't still have epilepsy.
Yeah. We have the same issue with my husband who's blind, but he's able to see like the top part of his eyes, so he can see like people, but he can't see like what you're doing with your hands or anything. And so when people go to shake your hand or something, he can't see that. And so he misses out on like a lot of social cues that happen with like from your head down with your body.
Yeah.
And, you know, just walking across the parking lot is like dangerous for him. But when we park in handicapped and get out and walk, people are like, look at, they're just like walking. There's nothing wrong with them. You know?
Oh, right.
Oh,
they're
there is so much shaming that goes on with parking spots. Like so part of how I got diagnosed with the connective tissue disorder is about 10 years ago cracked one of my vertebrae somehow, probably when I fell skiing. And in the process, also 3 of my discs either herniated, bulged, or one of them was completely smashed.
Oof.
And I couldn't even put on my own pants for like 6 months.
Wow.
So I had a placard for a while. And I have access to one if I need it now, which I don't usually, unless it's really icy. Because if I fall and hit that spot again, I would be paralyzed.
Yeah.
Because one of my discs is hitting the spinal cord. And I've had people leave nasty notes on my windshield because they saw me getting out of my car and walking.
Wow.
I have a friend who's off and on in a wheelchair. And if she parks in a spot and is walking that day, and often she's like in and out during a single day, because you know you only have so many spoons, and that's a whole concept of like, how do you have enough to shower and go get your groceries, or is today just a grocery day and you don't shower because you can't stand up that long? And she's gotten screamed at by people and had things thrown at her.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
People are
the people who think like that they can see if you are disabled or not based on what they can see and think that they have the right to judge you, it's pretty massive.
It's wild.
I also have a problem with like the university handicap parking system, because if you're just parking at the university for the day, you don't go over there every single day, there's no point in buying an entire pass like for the semester. And so one day my husband came to pick me up from class, parked in handicapped, and we got ticketed because we didn't have the placard. So what are you supposed to do? Like, walk all the way over to the ticket places, which aren't always handicap accessible, or you just take the $20 ticket. We just take the tickets all the time, but
at least it's only $20. I've had them be $100 before.
Yeah. Well, they build up, so throughout the semester they get higher and higher, and then they boot your car after a while.
Wow.
Yeah, I tried to in the winter get a pass from the university because it's really icy. And they're like, well, you still have to pay for the regular parking pass.
Yeah.
And then an extra for the handicap pass. And I'm like,
What?
well, hello, gatekeeping. Do you know how much
Do you know how
extra?
expensive it is to have any kind of disability in the first place? Like, let's just tack on to that. No problem.
Let alone in a pandemic where
Right?
I don't have a job because I'm not teaching. I'm in grad school. And also what job am I supposed to go out and get? There's like not really a dearth of jobs available right now.
Right.
And I'm not going to go down to Albertsons and get a job clerking at a like a grocery store in a pandemic.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm immunocompromised.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's awful. That's just
So yeah, it's and the way that it's handled also by the university is just like, so I recently found out that the way, like, say scholarships and stuff are given to students per department is based on equality, meaning every student gets an equal amount. Even though we give financial statements and we give all this other stuff. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
You mean a student that comes in all 4 limbs working healthy, doesn't even ever go to the doctor? Like some of these like 24-year-olds come in and don't even have insurance because they're just like, I'm cool, I'm healthy, is getting the same amount of money as someone like me, who my medical bills every year are like $10,000 and up.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine. That's not an access issue at all.
Right.
Yikes.
Especially when we just established like one of many, many ways of why it's more expensive for people with disabilities to attend college.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Fun story about college and disabilities. I went on a study abroad when I was an undergrad over the summer to Spain. And the professor that was leading that study abroad had not taken the time to read our medical, like any of our paperwork, basically.
Oh my
She did
God.
not read our medical release files. And when we got there, the time change had screwed with a new medication that I was on for my seizures. And I started like phasing out during my morning, because we were also, our classes were 7 a.m. to 1 p.m. And then they would go, we had siesta, and then we would go from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And then everyone would go out for the night, and some nights they'd stay out till 5 a.m. and we had 7 a.m. classes. I have to have more sleep than that. Like, my brain just does not function on that little sleep. And so I was definitely going home earlier most nights when I could find someone to walk back with me. A lot of times I was having to walk back alone 20 minutes from where we were in school to the apartment that we were at alone, in another country.
Yeah.
I'm 21 and I'm like, this isn't cool. So I ended up staying out all night just so that I could be near people I knew and feel a little safer.
Yeah.
So I go in and I'm like, hey, I'm having some problems. Like, I'm having like mini seizures in my morning classes because I'm taking my medication too late and it's fixing with me. And my professor, who had not read my form, she's like, what are you talking about? You don't have seizures. No one told me anything about that. Like, you liar. You liar trying to get special attention. And then, this goes best with the gestures. But, I'm Amanda and I think I'm special because I have seizures. And if you're listening on the podcast, you might remember a Trump presser where he made fun of a disabled reporter.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what my professor did to me.
What the hell?
And yes. And I called the university. I called and said, like, oh my God, this is happening. This is ridiculous that someone would do that. And Turns out she had the paperwork, and the university told her that I was probably trying to get a free pass for drinking and not doing any work in Spain on my study abroad, and just to ignore me.
Well,
and it turned into 3 months of, like, every day of the week we had a meeting as a group with this professor, and every day I was mocked repeatedly in front of my peers and in private meetings for being disabled.
oh my God.
Yeah. And I submitted a formal complaint when we got back, but also that was when I had my very first PTSD diagnosis.
Yeah.
And she sued me for libel and defamation of character for filing that complaint.
Oh my God, this story just snowballs.
It just gets worse. And then she failed to comply with court orders, like for turning in any of her paperwork. I went through like a ton of interviews, and she also sued my mom for calling the school and being like, hey, what the hell?
Wow.
It lasted like I graduated undergrad and I went to grad school, and I finished grad school before this lawsuit was over.
Jesus.
And I can only discuss it now because she died last year. I had to sign an NDA with the lawyers and the school and all of that to never talk about that trip, to never talk about the lawsuit, to never talk about any of that, because they didn't want it going to the media. The school, and I have all these documents of the school telling her, like, it's okay, she's just lazy, she's just, trying to get a free pass on these classes, trying to just, how students and how they like to party in foreign countries and not do anything. I'm like, I had a fucking 4.0.
Yeah.
I just want to point out that you're like the opposite of lazy, by the way. Like, you're working on 2 master's degrees right now and you already have one.
Yeah, I think some of my overworking tendencies kind of stem from that trauma of being told on a daily basis that I was lazy and stupid and pathetic and a whiner, and all of these things being like drilled into my head.
Yeah.
By this person who would go on, like, the university didn't do a thing. They let her keep teaching these study abroads.
Ooh, ew.
She had tenure. When she finally retired, she was a professor emeritus, and she got all these awards.
Jeez.
And yet what she did to me was like so vicious.
Yeah.
Such like a terrible personal attack.
Well, and like over a prolonged period of time too.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, it's not a good thing, but it's a different thing if like somebody has a lapse of judgment or of character, and is like a dick. And then later is like, oh, hey, I was a dick, I won't do that again. But like continuing to make that same decision day by day over a 3-month period, that's just somebody who is a dick. No offense to dicks. Sorry. Sorry, dicks, you didn't deserve that.
Yeah. And there was also some slut shaming thrown in there for fun.
Oh, good.
I was a young female college student, and I was like, what?
My Lord.
What is happening here?
Yeah.
But that is sadly pretty standard for how universities perceive disabled students.
Mm-hmm.
And that was asking for a very simple accommodation. I was just like, can you talk to my morning teachers and let them know that I am essentially, like, give them a DSS note, like let them know that I have this condition, it's documented, and I'm not just falling asleep in morning class.
Yeah.
That all spiraled from a simple, like, accommodation request
Like a very simple one too. Not even like trying to overhaul anything or
I was like, I'm not trying to get a free pass on anything. I just want you to like, because I've mentioned it to them and they're like, proof for it's a no-go.
Wow.
I'm so
sorry.
And that's kind of the thing that students face where everyone reads them a kind of a disability clause at the beginning of the semester that's in the syllabus.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that's kind of worst case scenario of what can happen when you disclose a disability in the classroom, but it happens. And so that fear of being like attacked for disclosing a disability or treated poorly or just written off as a nobody who is not worth anything because you disclose that you have a disability both in workplaces and in school is really like intense. And so there's so much shame and students who are like, I don't want to disclose it, so I'm just going to do my best to pretend I don't have anything wrong with me. And it's not something that's wrong with them. It's just something that something you have to work around. It's there are pathways and we should be accommodating this, but a lot of times we just shame people for asking for help.
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate. And kind of to segue that into sexuality, I'm good at that. That turn. It's the same way, like the way that people get mad at disabled people for parking in spots, and some people even get mad that there are handicap parking spots.
That doesn't make any sense to me. That's why I laughed. Probably
doesn't make any sense to me either. I'm like, you're just angry for no reason. You just mad to be mad.
Right.
Like, maybe you just need to go work on yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Take a time out.
Like people have gotten mad just that I say I'm disabled. And people don't think that disabled people are like legitimately human beings with all the wants, needs, fears, urges as anyone else.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, you can't be in college. You're not a whole person. Or like, oh, good for you for trying to better yourself. It's
ew, what a gross thing to say to somebody.
Yeah, there's a lot of really gross things that get said. It's a lot of infantilization, I think.
Yeah, and I think like my sort of take on the idea that sex and disability need to be talked about as not separate things, but as one thing, is that very much that infantilization that happens. And I think that the two topics go together also because it's they're two topics that make people intensely uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
Talking about disability, talking about sexuality, people get really uncomfortable and shut down and don't know what to do. So they just don't talk about either subject, much less putting those two subjects together. It's just like no go. And because we don't have any kind of acceptance culturally of this being something acceptable to talk about, we don't talk about it. And it's just this big, dark, scary hole in the conversation.
Yep. Like people, I mean, when you disclose to someone that like, oh, my mom has cancer, people are all like, like, we don't know what to say to that. Imagine saying like, I have cancer. And people are just like, yeah, my grandma had that one. And then they're just like, let me know if you need anything, and you like never see them again. Because it makes people very uncomfortable to consider that, like, they don't want to step on anything like uncomfortable. They don't want to say anything wrong, but they also don't know what to say,
right?
Because they've never heard anyone talk about it.
Yeah. I think a large part of this issue, especially that I've noticed here, like in Montana, is that there's like this pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of mentality here.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're looking at a society that believes that there's only one way to be productive, and no other way is acceptable, we're looking at like this capitalist, colonial view of other types of productivity that other people can bring to the table. And that's dangerous when you're trying to uphold like these like capitalist, colonial, white supremacist like rules, like gatekeeping rules to society.
I mean, personally, one of my favorites is that, you know, a lot of people believe that a woman is only legitimate, like like women's purpose is to be a vessel for children. And
Right.
I have heard this messaging so much in my life that, like, well, if you don't want children, or if you don't have children, what is your purpose on earth?
Right.
Right.
And I'm like, hi, thanks. I am, like, because of my genetic condition, unable to have children.
Right.
So are you saying that my existence is pointless? Okay, thanks, bye.
Yeah, like a right and wrong way even to be a like gendered person. Like,
I mean, the discussion during COVID especially has been very, very damaging, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard, like, well, disabled people are just a drain on society. That narrative is especially strong here in Montana.
yeah.
If you ever read the comments on a Missoulian article, I recommend it.
If you ever look at the priorities that our state legislators who are working in, you know, appropriations, where they put their money, that's deeply rooted in Montana, like, thought processes.
Oh yeah, the idea, like, so many places are cutting Medicaid benefits.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so many people think that, like, all social welfare programs go to is like people who are worthless and on drugs and yada yada yada. I get Medicaid because a majority of my income goes to medical expenses.
Yeah.
But I am, well, technically I'm on drugs, but none of them are really recreational.
Unfortunately.
Because I have brain issues, and I tend to stay away from things that are at all mind altering, because I've had plenty of visual hallucinations without my consent in my life from seizures.
Not nearly as much fun.
They don't seem like a fun trip for me.
Right.
Yeah, like that's not something I want to do on a weekend away at the gorge.
Yeah.
Like, no. I'm gonna pass. I'm gonna pass on that. But also, like, I'm a productive member of society, I like to think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do things that are for the general good of the public. I volunteer a lot, but I feel like I shouldn't have to excuse my existence either.
I feel like a lot of cultural attitudes around people with disabilities generally come from this idea that, like, in order to accommodate anyone, we have to do extra work, and we don't want to do extra work. So we're going to be whiny and bitchy and mean about it, and we're going to try to devalue people who want to do things because it's easier for us if they just stay away. And so we've developed all of these systems to make that easier for more able-bodied people, like making it harder to get parking if you're disabled, making it so that if you are on disability, you can't make more than a certain amount of money so that you can't actually participate in so many things. Or
do you know how many disabled people have to get, like, or if people become disabled, they have to get divorced because their income is, as a couple, is too much to be on disability.
Yeah.
So they either can't get married or they have to get divorced and live separately in order to remain on disability. It's
it's
like
disgusting.
Really, unfortunately, common trend.
Yeah.
Which
I've heard a lot about that lately, and it definitely is. It's like, if you want this measly reward that we will dangle in front of you, you must basically remove yourself from being, you know, a quote productive member of society, because you can't try to work a full-time job and be on disability. So it's like, well, we don't want you to get in our way, so we'll just shunt you off to the side so that we don't have to work too hard at letting you be a part of society.
And I've actually lost a job because their insurance company rejected me.
Wow.
What?
Pre-Affordable Care Act, when insurance companies could reject you for pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I lost out on a job that I'd gotten the job, but their insurance company rejected me. And the company was like, we can't provide you insurance.
I used to be so afraid of that happening that when I would go on a job interview, I would just right up front be like, you should know I have a health condition. So if you want to put me on your insurance, it might be expensive and that might be a liability for you. And the people doing the interviews would always be like, oh, no, don't tell me this. Like, this is not stuff that I'm supposed to know. And I'm like, I just don't want you to be mad at me later if you hire me and this becomes an issue for you. Like, I just want to put it out there. It's like you have to walk this incredibly fine line to succeed if you're a person with any kind of health condition, let alone a health condition that causes a disability. And I think, like, what the kind of general direction I was going in with that is that in the world of sexuality, especially when it comes to like sex education, anything involving the exchange of money for sexual services or education or anything like that, I feel like there's a similar feeling of, well, sure, it would be nice if we could accommodate folks with disabilities, but that's more work for us to consider people with different needs.
We've been asking for video conferencing, working from home. You know, a lot of people have this issue. And before the pandemic, we were like struggling, trying to get, you know, this more accessibility to that kind of thing and more accessibility to like virtual classes, and being refused, like, oh, we can't do that. We don't have the technology to do that. And boom, global pandemic. As soon as it affected all the ableds,
right?
We had that technology like the next day.
Yeah,
right.
And it was like that. And like now, half the classes I'm in are both taught online and in class, and it's the same kind of education that we were getting before. They could have made those accommodations years ago.
I can tell you that I was making those accommodations years ago. I had a student in a Spanish class that I was teaching at a community college who had a recurrent cancer and had to go back into chemotherapy at a far away, like a distance. He was in Lawrence, Kansas, and I was in Iowa. And so it was 4 or 5 hours away. And so she was staying there and just basically living in the chemo ward because it was cheaper than getting housing nearby for a twice weekly infusion. So I just had her Skype in. And I set up my computer like she was one of the students in the classroom and did my lecture. And then when they had to do like speaking to each other interactive, she just turned the laptop and she talked to the person she was next to. And that was in, I want to say like 2013 or 14. And her advisor, everyone else was telling her she had to drop out of school.
Wow.
Yeah, they tried to tell me that when I had one of my kids, that and he was young, that I should just drop out for the semester and
Yeah.
tend to my
And I
child.
told her, I'm like, there's no reason you need to drop out. Like,
yeah.
if I can do this in a class that's 100% about communication
Mm-hmm.
and interacting with your fellow students, and I solved it with a laptop.
Yeah. But the thing about this is it doesn't just open this up to an entirely like whole group of people, like education, but you can actually use these same techniques to be able to teach college classes in jails and prisons and allow that access to people who
But
are there as well.
A
But
lot of people don't want them to have that access.
Right.
Yeah,
How do we
and
gatekeep
it's
effectively if
true.
everyone can access things?
Right. And the other thing is like if people are getting educated in prison or in jail, then that changes the perspective of like these people are criminals and they broke the law, and really
And
that's not the
they're
case
also
for a lot of people.
they're broken, and we have to put them away because we can't let them out in society with the rest of us normal people.
Yeah.
And that's how the conversation is. There's normal people and there's disabled people. There's criminals and there's normal people.
Yeah.
Like, and that vision of what a normal person is, you know, cis,
There's
white.
also
There's also normal people, and then there's sex perverts.
Yes.
right.
And if any of those things overlap, if any of the non-normals from any of those columns overlap, like, oh, God help us.
Yeah.
It is
It's literally
the
the end times.
I've been talking about this for my reservation, like how I wanted to have, I pitched the idea of putting, like allowing the reservation to have internet for everybody.
Right.
That everybody has access to internet, and also that you should teach college classes to people in jail on reservations. And both of these
Lenny.
came with problems with, yeah, both of these came with like, they're just going to look up porn. Well,
So
what the fuck do you think I'm doing? Like when I'm not making this podcast, you know, I'm like you know, that people are going to do that. It doesn't fucking matter. The point is that people have access to education. People have access to, like, being able to go to class when you can't get up because it's too painful.
Like, honestly, I fundamentally believe that sexual satisfaction and pleasure is as much of a fundamental human right as anything else that we consider that. And not that we should necessarily be letting people, you know, like access porn that is illegal or that is, you know, it like hurting people. But I mean, letting prisoners have access to porn, why would that be a problem?
I mean,
like,
there was a court case that I listened to a lot of true crime podcasts. There was a court case where they had a witness to a murder, and the defense's way of getting him dequalified basically was to say he watches a lot of porn. And it worked.
Yep.
Because people think so poorly of anyone who looks at porn, never mind the fact that pretty much everybody looks at porn.
Yeah.
But
here's the other thing is that even if that has to be your way to argue this, then if there is a communal, like, internet, then it's probably much easier to see if somebody's looking up illegal things. You know?
I ran a computer lab in undergrad, and yes, we caught a lot of students using porn in the lab, which was actually a game that, because it was back in the day when everyone had a desktop in the lab, and there was a person up front who had access, and we could view the screens of anybody. And we could also take control of your mouse and keyboard, because it was a language lab. So it was the kind of thing where your teacher could go up front and have and point you to the right things and stuff. It was weird software. But the other lab attendants and I would have a real fun game of if you're monitoring and there's only a couple people in the room, check what's on all the computers, because guaranteed if there's 4 people in the room, one of them is watching porn. It's not allowed on university computers, but it's real fun to take control of their mouse and keyboard and type in this is God. I'm watching you.
That's so mean.
So mean, but do you know how many of those people were jerking it underneath the table? And I had to clean those chairs.
Oh.
Okay, fair. You're in.
There's a time and a place for that, and
Yeah.
that's in your dorm room.
Well, right. And that's like, that's kind of part of like the larger issue that like I see kind of linking disability issues and sexuality issues more generally, is that like, if we don't talk about sex and we don't talk about porn as a real thing, people literally can't control themselves because they don't have a context to place it in. They don't know how to behave. They jerk it in class, like, or in the computer lab. Like,
Right, exactly.
I have a really unfortunate story about this.
Just really quick, I think this is a great place to also remind everyone to read Lindsay's book, Watching Porn on Audible. Okay, carry on.
Thanks. I have a book. It's called Watching Porn. It's a memoir of my time as a journalist covering the world of adult entertainment. And it's very much meant to talk about those things that we don't talk about and help people, I don't know, develop language and skills about like how you do talk about these things, because they're fine. It's okay. We can talk about them. And I did get to narrate the audiobook version, which I am very proud of.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. But I want to hear your story.
Yeah.
So where I went to school, we really didn't have much of sex ed. It was kind of the girls volleyball coach yelling at us that if you have sex, you'll get AIDS and die.
Yeah.
But the kids in the special education classroom did not even have that. They just didn't get any, which came around to bite the school in the ass big time.
Yeah.
When two of the students in that class, who were also cousins, started a relationship, because we were in the same class, I think. So they were like 15, 16.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much actual education they got, because I wasn't in that classroom, but like they were telling everybody about it at lunch.
Oh dear.
Oh no. Oh no.
But wouldn't it be nice if students were really like, oh no, instead of probably saying horrible, mean?
I don't know if anyone actually said anything mean to them. I think it was just like a shock went through the rest of us. Just like, we're also like 15 and 16, and what do we do?
Right.
Like,
Right.
we don't know. I don't know if anyone in authority ever even found out.
Huh.
Like, honestly don't know what happened with that.
Right. And like that's the kind of thing that happens when you don't talk about these things.
Like when you teach little kids that it's called like, that's your cookie, and that's your special place, and you don't give them the vocabulary, and then something happens and they talk about it in ways that people don't understand what they're talking about. But when you've got like, maturing people, like even adults with disabilities who've never been talked to about that, who you want to protect and cuddle them and save them from the dark, dirty world, they still have bodies.
Right.
Right. We see the same issue when talking about race, where we had this argument in class the other day where we were talking about how, oh, well, you can't tell your kids about that. And I'm like, well, people of color have to tell their kids about that because it's an issue that affects them. But it's horrifying to me to think that these kids are learning about sex in a lunchroom, for one.
Right.
Instead of in the classroom. And it's also horrifying that the town that I live in right now teaches middle schoolers that abstinence is the way to go. And I've butted heads with them before about this, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, but it still bothers me.
Yeah. Well, it is like you have to equip people for the world. That is the purpose, right, of education, ostensibly. And when you're not giving people even the most basic of tools for navigating life, I mean, you're leaving people open to all of the ills that you think you're protecting them from by not talking about those things in the first place. And I think that speaks particularly to the special education classrooms.
I think there's some places where it's actually prohibited to teach sexual education in special ed classrooms.
Oh my God.
I don't know if that's still the case now, but there have been a lot of places where, it's considered immoral. And, there's definitely been cases of like, no matter what, it's definitely rape if the person is intellectually disabled. Mm-hmm. Like there's no possibility of consent.
I mean, sexual education isn't usually just about sex. I mean, it includes like information about like your body.
Reproductive health?
Yeah, right, exactly. And so if sex ed isn't being taught, that means reproductive health isn't really being covered either.
Right? I mean, if you get your first period and no one has ever talked to you about the fact that that's going to happen to your body, that's like fucking terrifying. That's a life and death situation, you think, Like the basic anatomy is basic for a reason. Like we need to have access to this information.
That goes back to this
for
infantilization.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally saw this conversation happening on Twitter yesterday. There's a woman who's an audiologist who has a cochlear implant. And she was doing a reaction to all of those cute cochlear implant videos, reaction videos of people hearing for the first time.
Yeah.
And she was just like destroying them. She's like, look, one, most of those are probably non-consensual because they're children and they don't realize they're about to go like viral on the internet. And two, for most people, what you're seeing is not happiness, it's fear. Because it's terrible. She's like, I can tell you from having 2 cochlear implants, it's terrifying to suddenly have like all of this noise that you've never had inside your head. It's like an explosion.
Right. Your brain doesn't know how to filter it yet.
If you look at the faces of those people, many of them are not expressing joy.
Yeah, especially like babies. And when you think about it, like people who are hearing and who can see are doing that in the womb. Like your body is teaching itself before you're even born how to like filter those sounds, how to like, filter
and
those sensations. And then...
it takes months or years to learn to filter, like to properly adjust to a cochlear implant.
Yeah.
And so that's a very vulnerable moment for people.
Yeah.
And really not one that we should be watching for ooey gooey feelings.
Yeah.
There's even a word for it in the disabled community. We call it inspiration porn.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, show me off like, oh, look at this. It's like the Madison Cawthorn thing. Like he was like, he stood up on stage from his wheelchair. Yay, let's elect him, even though he's sexually assaulted multiple women and lied about basically everything he's ever done.
Oh, that's not a problem in America, though. I think we've established this one. I mean, whatever,
That he was never going to be a Army Ranger. He never was an Army Ranger. He would like everything about his car crash story was a lie, blah, blah, blah. But to be like, the reason that we cheer disabled people on is because they do something like stand up from a wheelchair. Like, so what if someone else doesn't ever stand again? Do they not ever get a platform like that? Or, are we only given a spotlight for overcoming our disabilities and not for other things that we do?
Right.
Like, it's like, is that our singular identity marker?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really good way of putting it.
Like just walking down the street with his prosthetic leg, and somebody stopped him and was like, "You are so brave." And he's like, "Why? Because I walked down the street? Why am I brave? Can you tell me why I'm brave?" And the person was so offended because they were trying to compliment them.
That is my
And,
least favorite thing ever, is when someone's like, you're so strong. You're so brave. If I became disabled tomorrow, I think I'd probably just kill myself. Like, I don't know what I'd do. Like, I don't know how I'd manage. And I'm like, bitch, you do what you have to do to get through the fucking day. Because if I didn't, play through the pain every day, or just, push through every obstacle, I would not exist. I would not be here. So don't tell me like, oh, I don't know how people who become paralyzed or who lose a limb, like the Boston Marathon guy, go on with their lives after that. Like, and he even got married. Like, yeah, because he's a human being, and he didn't want to lay around like a potato, so he learned to walk again, and he got married, and he went on with a life, because like, you are not the sum total of the worst thing that's ever happened to you. And you aren't, like, if you believe that you're limited to only being like, well, I guess I'm just stuck now. You will be, but don't put that on me. Don't put that on other people, what you think. Like, and I don't want to, like, unless I'm out here going like, am I not inspiring you? Like, I'm going to be a public speaker on the inspiration speaker circuit. Don't walk up like, oh. I've had people walk up and do like that's another pet peeve, is people will do, like, super religious people will walk up and do a laying of hands. Without asking. And they'll just come up and they're like, I'm gonna pray that you be healed. And I'm like, one, do not touch me. And two, I don't need your healing. Like, I have modern medicine, thanks. And 100% of the time they ask for money afterwards.
Oh my God.
The awesome comedian, Michael Beers, has a joke that isn't really a joke. It's an actual true story where he was just getting out of his car is what he was doing. And somebody came up to him and was like, there's a special place in heaven for people like you. And he's like, what? There too? Like,
yeah. It's I mean, it follows you everywhere.
Well, that's also like, that's another example of infantilization. Like, just assuming that it's okay, that you don't have to give your consent before somebody touches you or tries to perform a spiritual act on you. Like, that's kind of intimate. Like, no, thanks. But it's taking away, it's not even taking away your agency. It's someone showing that they don't think that you have agency in the first place, which I think is a lot of where
you're not
this all comes
capable
from.
of doing or
The
deciding for yourself because you are less than.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
You are, I mean, I did a little bit of, because I wanted to make sure I had my dates right, a little bit of like historic research on like disabled people in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was legal to forcibly sterilize people with disabilities in the US until 1963. And it is actually still to this day legal to force, like, sterilize someone with an intellectual disability by parental consent. It's usually like only in extreme cases, but like there's still kind of a genocide going on.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of disgusting to begin with. Like, if there, is an extreme case where somebody clearly isn't able to give consent to sterilize them. What does that imply about the people doing it?
If you are disabled, you are 10 times more likely to experience gender violence, especially intellectual disability, like women with intellectual disabilities. And that pertains to things even like trauma, are much higher, like rates of targeted for assault and even long-term victimization, because nobody really listens to them because they aren't seen as, fully mentally capable.
Right. Yeah. And this is something I've been thinking about, and it goes back to the education aspect, and particularly the sex education aspect. If you are not giving people the basic tools, the basic understanding of how this works, how even their own bodies work, you're basically setting people up to be victimized. If you don't have the language and you don't have the education around what your rights should be, like in an ideal world or situation, and in some cases, these people may not even have some of those rights legally speaking, like what you just said about, parental consent being enough to sterilize an adult in some situations. But if you're not giving people those basic building blocks, they're already going to be at a higher risk
to be taken advantage of or hurt.
I mean, you hear of it a lot with people coaching intellectually disabled individuals, saying, it's okay. There's a really famous case from the East Coast. Her name was Anna Stubblefield. She was actually an ethics professor at, I believe, Harvard. And she did this thing, and it was like, she would take a person who was like non-communicative disabled, like severe cerebral palsy was this particular case, and she would use small movements and gestures of this man's to guide. It's called guided writing, and she would communicate for him. Like kind of like a Ouija board. Like she would use his small movements to guide the letters and spell out things. And she claimed that he told her through her interpreting his movements, that he loved her and wanted to do things. And so they had, in quotes, a sexual relationship. But remember, he is basically non-mobile, non-verbal. And so it was really her doing all of the aggressions. Like she was giving him a blowjob. She laid him out on the floor and had sex with him. And then she says that he wanted to disclose the relationship to his family. So she did. And they were like, whoa, nope. Went to court. And people are still kind of debating this a little bit because, well, one, she was in charge of his caretaking and communication. So really she should not have entered that relationship because that totally violates every ethical boundary of patient provider boundaries. But they also stopped having him do any kind of therapy with any outsider, I guess. So he lost, if he was communicating, that's a big if. If he was communicating, he lost any ability to communicate after that. And if he had consented, then, it was his choice, but we will never know if he did.
Wow.
And it's all a big, like, if people are nonverbal or non-communicative, do they still, like, where do we draw a line?
Right. That's a really very fuzzy gray area. But as with many gray areas, and like, obviously I know that there are a lot of intricacies to a question like this because there's a lot of different people in different situations. But like, I always feel that with gray areas, the best thing that can be done is that this can be talked about.
Right.
Like, the more people are talking about it more often, the more we can start to develop clearer ideas about what constitutes consent in a situation like that. And unfortunately, this topic makes people very uncomfortable and they do not want to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of cases of women who have been completely paralyzed, like quadriplegics, who then go on to have children, and people are just like, but how?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, there's a lot of, you know, an able-bodied person doesn't get asked the kind of questions that disabled people get asked. Like, people will full on ask you, like, on the street out loud, like, but how does that work?
Right.
How do you do it?
Yeah. That's always the question, right? Tell me all of the personal logistical details.
Tell me physically how that functions. I am just so curious. I don't have any boundaries.
Yeah,
because you're an object, not a person.
Right.
Yeah.
People use like the veil of, I'm just trying to be more educated about this, or like, I'm just trying to be more woke, you know. That's not up to people with disabilities to do that for you, you know, to tell you how that works. There's a difference between being educated about something and talking about something and violating a person's personal, like, space.
Right.
Yeah. There are all these conversations going around on the internet right now about, like, the vaccine passport and whether or not that's a violation of HIPAA.
Mm-hmm.
And what constitutes, what can you ask a person? Because you can't ask someone, like, if they have a service animal, what the service animal is for, because that's rude.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's like this whole idea that, like, me as the normal person can ask you as the quote not normal person anything that I want, because you are not really a person with feelings to me. You are the other, and therefore to me right now, you are my source of education and information.
Yeah. And people just, like, they're I don't know if it's insecurity about the whole vaccine thing or what drives them to be like, I demand to know, like, what your accessibility issue is. Like, why do you get to do this and I don't? Or why do you get to have your dog in the store with you, but I don't?
Yeah.
Like, why can't I bring my peacock on this plane?
Yeah.
Right. But you can bring your cat. Like, what's the difference? And then you have to explain to me what's wrong with you. And like, what's a violation and what's not? Why is a vaccine passport not a violation, but asking me what my service animal is for is?
Yeah.
And, like, I'm like, it's very clear that y'all don't think about these things on a daily basis.
Right.
Because when it comes up as you know, might be affecting you, you get really aggressive and hostile, but, like, this affects us every day.
But it's also, like, very much, like, inherently putting the other person, like, the person who is demanding this information, is automatically putting the other person on the defense.
It's like inherently
invasive. Yeah. I mean, it's called a microaggression, but it's not micro at all, and it definitely does not feel that way.
Yeah, and it puts a lot of pressure on us to disclose information that we may or may not want to be public.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I talk pretty openly about most of my issues. I mostly do. Like, I've had a few things that I just wasn't ready to talk about at the time that were reasons that something was happening and people were like, but explain. I'm like, that's my very personal medical information.
Mm-hmm.
So you like jumping down my throat is really invasive and rude and really condescending.
Yeah.
Like, because once it's out there, and people will never, like, I've had people not want to be roommates at a hotel in a conference because they heard I had seizures, and they're like, whoop. But what if that happens? I don't want to be responsible for that.
Right. Yeah.
You would not be responsible for me.
Well, yeah, that's totally infantilization. Like someone else has to take care of you, and
I'm not asking you to be responsible for me. I don't want to pay $800 for a double queen bed hotel room by myself.
Yeah.
I was just seeing if you want to go halvesy on the other bed, but I can tell that's not a go.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I need you to, if I suspect that I'm having issues and I need you to like watch for me, I'll ask, but I didn't ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, grown ass adult can take care of myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's where like the idea of like having to do work for people with disabilities like comes back in. It's like, am I gonna have to do anything? Am I gonna have to do work? Because there's a specific word that has come up a lot for me, which is burden. Is it going to be a burden for me? That's too much of a burden for me. I don't think we can manage that accommodation and whatnot. And I'm like, you think it's a burden for you?
Yeah.
Try being me.
Right.
It's a whole bunch of fun times here.
I definitely want to talk more about like disability in porn.
I was going to say, Lindsay, have you ever discovered any of the black holes of disability porn?
Yeah.
I mean, porn with disabled people in it? Yes.
Yeah. Like amputee porn is a big thing.
Oh, God, we got to get my friend Jean on the show sometime. She was Long Jean Silver in, I think, the 80s, became the first, quote, amputee porn star, but she was actually born with, I forget which leg. I think it's her left leg. She didn't have like God, I'm going to forget all the details and I'm going to get this totally wrong, but I think like right below the knee is where her leg ends. And so she was labeled as the first amputee porn star, but didn't really apply. But anyway, she did a lot of firsts on screen with her leg. We'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, and there's wheelchair porn, and like there's so many different genres that people are surprisingly into.
Yeah.
And I have received some odd offers, and I'm like, didn't advertise that, didn't really expect that to pop into my Facebook DMs, but
Facebook DMs, the Wild West.
Good for you for embracing whatever it is that motivates you. Just I'm not particularly interested in being involved.
That's another really tough topic, like around this general topic, is like, there's a difference between embracing something and fetishizing something. And I think when it gets into areas of disability, that line is not clear to many, many people, again, because it's not really talked about in a way that is understandable to most people. So I would love to talk more about this in the future, though, because we've been talking for a long time. But yeah, I mean, for real, I would love to dig into some of these topics, like the smaller topics that we've done like small tangents on. I would love to do full episodes which are like full tangents on those.
Yes,
in the future. So before we sign off, Amanda, is there anywhere that you would like to direct people to online to find out more about you and your work?
Oh man, I have an off and on relationship with social media, but I do have a website.
There you go.
It's amanda.mbar.com, and that middle letter is an M as in Mary. And then my last name is the same as someone's attorney general who should be in jail. Kind of a sore subject.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about all this great stuff. Like, I love, love, love talking about things that need to get talked about more. It just gives me life.
I mean, that's our jam.
Yeah.
Is breaking down colonial ideas of everything.
Yeah.
I love talking about it to people who are willing to actually talk about it and not like shut me down.
Yeah. Well, high fives all around, everybody.
So yeah, high fives.
So real quick before we sign off, I just want to tell people out there who are listening, this podcast is like a labor of love and we totally enjoy doing it. But if you are interested in what we're doing and you want to support us, there are a few ways that you can do that. The first one is on Patreon. Lenny has a Patreon that helps to fund what we do here on Hourgasm. That's patreon.com, Lenata Peppers. You can also, if you're listening on a podcatcher or on a platform that allows for reviews, if you want to write us a glowing review, that would be fantastic. That really, really helps boost us, helps more people find us when they are searching for podcasts in the first place. And if neither of those are for you, we do have social media. We are at Gasm Hour on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So if you are on any of those platforms and you want to retweet or share or comment or like, any of that helps us be seen by more people. And if you are not on any of those platforms and you don't do the internet at all, you can still tell your friends about us and how awesome we are. That always helps.
Yeah, get a tattoo.
Yeah. Yeah, put it in a really highly visible place. Neck tattoos.
Yeah.
Of our logo. Very good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I don't have one of those yet. I have a few others, but...
Well, I know what the three of us are doing as soon as it's safe out.
Hot tubs and tattoos?
Oh my God. Best night ever.
Yeah, tattoos after the hot tub. I don't want to get an infection.
I was going to say that's the worst idea I've had in a long time.
Sounds like a blast.
We'll get probably staff as well.
Oh my gosh. Then we can all go to the hospital together. It's going to be such a bonding experience.
Girls' night at the ER.
At least one person can go to the hospital. I don't think we can afford for everybody to go to the hospital.
Yeah, I just have to get somebody to smuggle out a whole bunch of antibiotics for the rest of us.
Can I get a go bag of that penicillin?
Yeah.
Thanks.
We'll just have one person loaded up with antibiotics and then we'll connect each other with IVs.
This plan is getting better by the minute. All right. Well, ciao, listeners. We'll be back in 2 weeks with something else that's amazing. We just are not sure what yet.
No, we know. We just want to surprise you.
That's it. That's what's happening.
Yeah.
Totally.
Let our love be a flame, not an ember. Say it's me that you want to dismember. Blacken my eye, set fire to my tie as we dance to the masochism tango. At your command, before you here I stand. My heart is in my hand. Ugh. It's here that I must be. My heart entreats, just hear those savage beats, and go put on your cleats and come and trample me. Your heart is hard as stone or mahogany. That's why I'm in such exquisite agony. My soul is on fire, it's aflame with desire, which is why I perspire when we tango. You caught my nose in your left castanet, love. I can feel the pain yet, love, every time I hear drums. And I envy the rose that you held in your teeth, love, with the thorns underneath, love, sticking into your gums. Your eyes cast a spell that bewitches. The last time I needed 20 stitches to sew up the gash that you made with your lash as we danced to the masochism tango. Bash in my brain and make me scream with pain, then kick me once again and say we'll never part. I know too well I'm underneath your spell, so darling, if you smell something burning, it's my heart. Excuse me. Take your cigarette from its holder and burn your initials in my shoulder. Fracture my spine and swear that you're mine as we dance to the masochism tango.